Okay, so Mrs. from the Woods says it's time for some garden gates. She's getting tired of closing up the garden with bungee cords and loose wire and string. So I've made my measurements. It's been raining all day and I'm in between coats of lacquer on the 5-piece MDF doors, and we have some time to start the gates. So let's head down to the shop and we'll get some gates started. Okay, so we've selected a couple of poles from the forest. These were either fallen or dead standing that we cut down, and Mrs. from the Woods is going to hand peel them and get it ready for building the garden gate. Well, Mrs. from the Woods must really want her gate badly. She's already got 3 of 7 peeled, working on the 4th, so she'll be done in no time flat. Then we can get on to building the gate. Okay, well, Mrs. from the Woods has peeled a number of poles that came out of the forest. I don't know if it's going to be enough for what I've got planned, and boy, she's not going to be happy if she hears that she has to peel one more. Unless I can fix the wood stretcher for today and get a little bit more out of these poles than I figured. But we'll see what we can do. So the plan is we're going to make a rustic gate with the tenon cutters and some structural screws. And a while back I purchased these tenon cutters for making rustic furniture. And they sat in the drawer for quite a while. I've got my hinges, picked them up at UFA, United Farmers Association, I believe that stands for. And we've made some preliminary measurements for the gate. So we're going to get to cutting these to length. Okay, well, I've done a quick sketch of the measurements in between the poles and how I think this is going to go together. And because the poles are actually trees, they're tapered a little bit. Now, it doesn't make a whole lot of difference, but in between the poles at the bottom, it's 101/2 inches, and at the top, it's 101 1/4, which is 3/4 difference. Now, not a huge deal. We'll make those, we'll account for that when we adjust the hinges. And the hinges that I got are farm gate hinges. They are a post that goes into a hinge bracket, and you drill a hole through the side post, and then you can adjust it with a bolt and a washer on each side, and you do that at the top of the bottom, but you have to allow a little bit for adjustments. So that's where I came up with the 2.5 inches, and if it ends up being a little bit more, a little bit less, the gap in the center, if it gets a bit bigger, well, not a big deal. And if it gets a little bit bigger at the sides, well, again, not a big deal. I don't think deer can scooch through 3-inch or 2.5-inch or whatever it ends up being. Anyway, we're going to cut the poles to length to 6 feet and see what we have left over, and make a jig for the table here at 46 3/4, assuming my math is correct. And yeah, then we'll start assembling these doors. So what I've done is made some temporary sides, which are 46 3/4 wide in between, which is going to be the width of our door. Because there's so much variation in the thickness and the width of the poles, it's going to be difficult to measure. So I figured, well, I'll clamp these to the side and then I can measure in between, account for the tenons from the tenon cutter, and also from a flat surface measure the center of the pole for where to drill. So I've kind of picked two poles to start. One is a bit bigger than the other, so I'll make that hinge side, and that'll be, well, latch side, I guess, if you want to call it that, and I'll start measuring in between. Okay, I've got my Stabila laser measuring device butted up to the left hand side of the gate. I've got a piece of MDF to account for square, so it doesn't matter where on that MDF I measure, that'll be the right measurement, so I'll have to account for that, plus 3/4 plus the tenon depth. And so the idea is that I'll butt the poles, or line the poles up with outside edges, and maybe I'll clamp it just so it doesn't move, and then make my 3 measurements where they've got to be for the cross beams. Take my measurements, make my adjustments, and cut the poles. Okay, so that's our first measurement. We'll make the account for the 3/4 inch MDF and the tenon depth, and then cut our first pole. Okay, we've got the tenon cutter all set up. It is a Veritas 1.5 inch power tenon cutter, it's called. Available at Lee Valley here in Calgary and other places across Canada. I'm sure it's available in the United States under a different name, but at any rate, it cuts a 1.5 inch tenon. So it has a corresponding 1.5 inch Forstner bit, which we'll cut in, which we will drill the holes for that tenon. So I've got the cross holes set up. I've allowed a 1.5 inch tenon, but this tenon cutter produces a shoulder, so I've added another 1/2 inch. So I've made a mark at 2 inches, which should be sufficient for doing the 1.5 inch tenon inside the sides and allowing for that 1/2 inch shoulder. So let's cut the first tenon. Okay, well, as it turns out, holding the poles that are round, and with all the torque that this unit generates, it's hard to hold the poles in place, so I came up with this portable clamp and a clamp on top, and that seemed to have fixed the problem. So now I've got the tenons cut on the 3 cross beams, and now it's time to figure out how to drill the holes into the sides. Okay, well, one gate is assembled. Took a little bit of finagling to get it to sit right, but after it's all said and done, it's sitting square, and yeah, pretty happy with the result. Okay, well, the gates are together. We'll let the glue set up. Second one went way easier than the first one. Had a middle of the night epiphany on how to make things go easier. Woke up and thought, how can I make this better? And as it turns out, my recommendation would be to really take your time and making sure your holes are straight and where they're located, and it makes things a whole lot easier. Make reference marks with your pencil. They can come off easily with an eraser. So yeah, this turned out okay. Happy with the result. Rustic look, what we're looking for. Next step is hinges, stain, put some fencing on the back, and get them up to the garden.